Ah, the F.E.A.R series. A legacy of games that shows how you could go so right with a game, and yet somehow completely forget what made the original game fantastic. I always found the aspects of gameplay and storytelling in F.E.A.R fascinating, which is why I was so shocked to see where the game series wound up going. I personally started this series about 2 years ago when Steam sales combined with my newfound Master Race rig gave me access to them, and my experiences certainly varied as much as the games. Given the nature of the game's genre, with how drastic the series got altered, I figure an academic look of what exactly happened in the game could be an interesting thing to observe. Now, considering the nature of this video and the time these games have been out, there will be spoilers, so this is your warning. Tread lightly, folks. For those of you that have had their heads in the ground as long as I have, the F.E.A.R series are first-person shooters centered around paranormal activity and horror. Developed mostly by Monolith Software and Timegate, the game was made as an experimental foray into new types of horror. The story focuses around Alma, a little girl with psychic powers to whom bad things happen, transforming her into a horrifying ball of paranormal destruction. Meanwhile, the company, Armacam Tech, decide that trying to fix Alma is not the best idea, and in a page directly out of Umbrella Corporation's business notebook, decide to weaponize her in order to corner the evil motherfucker market. Each game has you playing as a particular protagonist as they try to deal with Alma's psychic powers rampaging through the city in the form of cloned psychic soldiers and eldritch horrors. From a gameplay perspective, the game offers very advanced AI as one of its selling points, along with an innovative melee combat system and tactical gunplay. With summaries out of the way, let's bite into the gory details, shall we? F.E.A.R 1, the juggernaut of the series. Released on 2005 to 2007 across various gaming platforms, the game centers around the faceless protagonist Point Man as you hunt down known psychopath and suspected psionic Paxton Fettel. As you hunt down Fettel, however, you begin to see strange events that link everything to Armacam Tech and the existence of Alma, along with reasons to question Point Man's existence. Now, from a storytelling standpoint, F.E.A.R 1 does a lot of things right in a clever way. The developer has gone on record stating that horror is about the psychology of the encounter, and they constantly want to get under the player's skin. With that logic in mind, it's notable that Point Man has no distinct face or any dialogue, so he then becomes a vessel for the player to experience the world. And experiencing the world is a surreal thing. Action segments are a gripping experience, since you have to deal with daunting numbers and an AI that's trying to outsmart you. And the horror segments are all very unsettling and set out to make you distraught rather than scared. The player never feels outright safe in this game, even with some characters looking like something out of a B-movie. The combat is always gripping and escalating, while the horror is ever present even in subtle fashions. In many ways, how the story is told actively and passively make the game an experience rather than a product. On the note of experience, the gameplay of F.E.A.R 1 was something to experience. One of the main things that set Point Man apart from his squad was his ability to boost his reflexes to extraordinary levels, effectively slowing down time for himself and leaving others baffled. Oddly enough, this doesn't make combat any easier since the AI soldiers often have backup and actively try to flank you, while the bigger mechanical beasties just shrug off your storm of bullets and explode everything around you. It's an interesting trade-off because the AI is not a direct counter to you, but one that's adaptive, and often surprisingly effective. Combat itself is very cathartic, with weapons ranging from your basic assault rifles, a shotgun that could literally liquefy a human at any range, more ludicrous weapons like a stake gun and cannons, and a sci-fi laser sniper rifle. There's enough weapon variety to accommodate any style of murder a player might want. There's also melee combat, ranging from Liu Kang's bicycle kick to a low dropkick, among other moves that chain effortlessly into your gunplay. A lean function also exists in order to help with scouting an area without getting caught, or just generally being a campy bitch. Every mechanic comes together to make F.E.A.R 1 really enjoyable to play and hard to forget. F.E.A.R 1 was certainly a hallmark for the series, and for the first-person shooter genre as a whole. In a market rife with uncertainty, Monolith took an oversaturated game genre and a hard-to-handle story genre, and made a smash hit of a game. Not to give away too many spoilers, but F.E.A.R 1 ends with us taking out Fettel and setting off the equivalent of a paranormal nuke in an attempt to stop Alma, which ultimately failed. Naturally, that along with an endgame dialogue alluded to a sequel, which we will now segue into. While F.E.A.R 1 does have 2 free DLC stories to work with, they are generally non-canon to begin with, and the sequels made their stories ultimately irrelevant. Anyways, up next is F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin. Released in 2009 for the whole next-generation Spectrum, somehow we lost Timegate in the development team as the series IP got shifted to Activision in merger. Back to the story, we start from an unusual viewpoint in that we're not Point Man anymore. We now play as Michael Beckett, a Delta Force operative tasked with capturing the president of Armacam just seconds before Point Man's Psycho Crusher nuke goes mental on the city. After the paranormal shit hits the fan, Beckett wakes up in a hospital with some fresh new scars, a headache, and a creepy new stalker, Alma herself. With himself and his squad suddenly the victims of another Armacam brand evil plot device, Beckett and his team must now survive both Armacam's reactivated clone soldiers and psychic attacks from the creepy girl himself, all in a bid to desperately stop this nonsense once and for all. So how does the story play out? I'd say not bad. It handles the story competently, but they do certain things I don't find agreeable. For one, rather than the blank view of Point Man, we now have Beckett and his team of bright-eyed future murder victims. This in turn dilutes the impact of the story a bit because you aren't experiencing the horror yourself, but rather seeing it through Beckett's soldier glasses and his team's plight. The imposing and oppressive nature of the game is also lost when there always seems to be an NPC around to help you or tell you what to do.
She would say she covets you. She's a coveter. You're like free pizza at an anime convention. She can smell you. She wants to consume you.
The horror also seems to have taken a weird direction too. We're no longer unhinged or unnerved anymore, just outright scared by sudden flashes of spooky stuff or Alma just appearing for no reason. Sure, it's scary, but this is child's play compared to the weird shit I had to deal with in the original F.E.A.R. It's not all bad though. The kindergarten was legit really creepy and it felt like a return to form for a brief stint. I do like the characterization in F.E.A.R 2, however. F.E.A.R 1 was focused around the showdown of Point Man and Fettel, so both your enemies and your allies were ultimately faceless and irrelevant. In 2, your allies are all going through the same horrifying nonsense that Beckett is, which makes the story far more compelling in that aspect. Enemies other than the clones also have some emotion to them, getting angry when watching their buddies die and scared when paranormal events or Beckett's time stop were occurring. While not the best handling of horror, the story still played out well enough for me to push through to the end. The gameplay is another cluster of odd decisions. Beckett is supposed to be a new character, yet he has all the exact same gameplay benefits as Point Man, right down to reflex mode and extended melee. It almost feels like this game was meant for Point Man again, but orders from the top brass prevented that from happening otherwise. Leaning, however, was removed in favor for a strange cover system that involves flipping obstacles, which is interesting on paper, but without either a lean or static cover function, then this is ultimately worthless. The enemy AI also took a weird direction. While vocally the enemies would seem confused by your tactics, the AI would always know exactly where you were and react effortlessly, even with time stop enabled. There was also a distinct lack of flanking or advanced tactics like grenade flushing with the AI, but instead they were always set up in a death zone formation or running away from you when that plan failed. This felt really shallow to me since now the AI isn't as dynamic and fluid as it was in the first game, but now a shallow rebuild in an attempt to seem difficult. This is especially apparent when it comes to snipers, who will get a beat on you quickly and severely damage you if not kill you on the higher difficulties. The gunplay also feels really weak compared to F.E.A.R 1. The SMG and pistols are just unsatisfying to use. The shotgun sounds like a toy and needs at least 2 shots to kill even at point blank range, and the stake gun rarely appears anymore. The melee also feels far less effective in this game, and when combined with the goofball AI, then you might as well just find a corner and play peekaboo with him. I have no idea how the gameplay went this far south. It almost feels like another development team took over and was told to emulate the experience from F.E.A.R 1. I could barely find anything redeemable about 2's gameplay aside from the fact that it kinda feels like F.E.A.R 1, but not really. A sequel's supposed to improve and enhance the gameplay decisions from the first game, not try and conform to other standards. F.E.A.R 2 to me was an awkward step sideways. A way to test the waters of the future of the series without directly affecting the first game's story. Kinda. The game ends with Beckett going to another Armacam facility to stop Alma with a psychic amplifier array. This doesn't exactly work well, however, since the president of Armacam ambushes Beckett's team and seals both Alma and Beckett away in order to cover her ass. Some rather awkward exposition happens, resulting in Alma now being pregnant with Beckett's kid, setting the series up for another sequel! F.E.A.R 2 has a single piece of DLC that is used to link Paxton Fettel to the up-and-coming sequel, but I haven't personally invested in that. I don't like DLC. And now we've come to the black sheep of the series, F.E.A.R 3, released in 2011. Hey look, we've completely lost the original development team, and now we have new guys, Day One Studios, at the helm. At least we got Point Man back. Where'd you get that face from? Ah, it doesn't matter. My main concern is who's your red glowing friend?
So, tell me, what does it feel like to kill your own brother? Can't say I enjoyed it very much.
Oh boy. F.E.A.R 3 brings us back to the Point Man viewpoint of the story. With our former rival and now ever-present psychic ghost Paxton Fettel in tow, Point Man must now escape from Guadalajara of all places to return to the psychic catastrophe that went down during Beckett's escapades. Fettel says that we're tasked with stopping Alma from completely mind-melting everything in the Northern Hemisphere with her new kid, but it's so painfully obvious that Fettel has ulterior motives at hand. Now at this point I'm basically abandoning any and all forms of professionalism for the segment alone. F.E.A.R 3's story is a fucking mess. It's painfully clear that Day One Studios had no idea what the game was about, and abandoned any sense of cohesion for what might sound cool on the drawing board. We find ourselves in random parts of South America and the United States with no rhyme or reason whatsoever aside from Alma! Disasters ranging from psycho cults with their brains melted to psychic death novas occur like clockwork, despite none of the previous games having anything remotely close to that. There's apparently a slight romance nod with Jin, a former squad mate of Point Man's, but she had little if any plot relevance in the first game, so that's a bit awkward. The worst part is that there's no horror at all in a coherent sense. The entire game is just a giant action romp and stomp with the horror segments painfully muscled in. There are several jump scares with some faceless abomination that are just fucking hilarious at times. Areas that are meant to look unsettling just look so over the top and try-hard that all impact is lost. There are various flashback segments that offer little in terms of story and atmosphere. The game offers co-op, which pretty much destroys any sense of horror in the game when you can pal around with someone. Finally, Alma appears at random times but is always in a place you would not be looking at unless you were actively looking for her. And her presentation is just so boring and uninspired that I found myself teasing her whenever she appeared. What the hell happened to this game? How do you take something as surreal and atmospheric as F.E.A.R 1 and make this steaming pile? Nothing about the game evoked horror in the slightest. It's like the writers were just handed a bunch of Sci-Fi Channel horror movies and asked to make that. I would go on and ask about what happened to the psychology of encounter talk, but the developer apparently got the boot for these new guys. The whole experience was just an abominable mess, and I found myself asking why. Why does this tirade exist? They could have cut their losses halfway through and stopped, but no. They released this mess to the public thinking it was a serviceable sequel to the F.E.A.R series. What the hell? Now after that rage dump of a segment, it's gonna sound really weird when I say that F.E.A.R 3's gameplay was actually good. Keep in mind that it's nowhere near as good or tight as F.E.A.R 1, but they did a lot of cool experiments in terms of gameplay. Point Man's back, doing everything that Point Man does right. Leaning's kinda back in, but it's sticky first-person cover rather than the simple mechanic from the first game. Guns are satisfying to use again. All the cool guns are back. though the shotgun's kinda some weird P90 SMG wannabe, but still packs a respectable punch. The main kicker though is Paxton Fettel. You could play as him, either in co-op with a friend right out of the box, or single player after you beat a level as Point Man. Fettel is a fantastic character to play as, completely outshining Point Man in gameplay. Fettel can act as support by shielding Point Man, locking down an enemy, or throwing stuff through telekinesis. Fettel also has offensive options such as psychic lasers that you have to reload somehow, an execution maneuver when locking down an enemy, or he can possess someone. When Fettel possesses someone, he essentially becomes another Point Man but without time stop, which makes Fettel a jack-of-all-trades character. He really steals the show gameplay-wise. I'm almost a bit irritated that it takes so much effort just to play as him. The AI in this game sadly is a total slack job. Everything about the advanced AI from F.E.A.R 1 and 2 is gone now, and a box of rocks serves as the working brain for the enemy. Difficulty is now rooted in sheer numbers and bullet sponge enemies, which is hard to notice in co-op but painfully obvious in single player. Speaking of co-op, F.E.A.R 3 features competitive co-op, where certain feats add to a score system to figure out who's the better player, which adds a bit more incentive to play more effectively so your friend doesn't get bragging rights. The scoring system is weird, however, because Fettel's achievements are so conducive to his gameplay model, while Point Man's are just all grindcore standard FPS things, which is disappointing since you're basically going to be fighting over which one of you plays Fettel. Hell, everything about the gameplay feels like it was made for Fettel, which makes me wonder why Point Man is here aside from being a tank or a distraction. My main issue with the score system, however, is that it affects the ending, which is silly because if there's a skill gap between you and your friend, then you're going to be fighting in real life for the ending you want, or you have to discuss it beforehand. It's so weird, the gameplay and engine are so derivative from the previous F.E.A.R models that I have a hard time calling it a F.E.A.R game, but it's still fun as hell to play and keeps many of the core tenets of the past games. F.E.A.R 3 is a highly controversial way to end the series, and I can see why. The story ends depending on who is the better son of Alma. After a huge action sequence against a giant Stygian monster that has no explanation for its existence, the game tallies up who is the best son overall and decides if everything is somehow hunky-fucking-dory with Point Man, or the obviously evil end happens with Fettel. What a ham-fisted way to end the series, but hey, at least it's done for what it's worth. Sad, really. Despite the train wreck of a plot, I at least had more fun playing F.E.A.R 3 than I did 2. It's bizarre, to say the least. And with that, this rousing dissection of the F.E.A.R series is over. From a design perspective, this series was such a roller coaster of weird decisions that it would make EA's head spin in confusion. I'm glad the series is at least over, however. I wouldn't want to see how this rabbit hole could go any deeper into really weird design choices. Sadly, this series ended like the horror genre as a whole, dead in a corner as a former shell of its past glory. Sorry, F.E.A.R, you were fun.